This is the Koenigsegg Agera RS, and it's basically hypercar royalty. Only 25 of them were built between 2015 and 2018, and in 2017 this car went on a record-breaking rampage. Although it's been bettered since by the Agera and more recently the Jesko Absolute, the Agera RS ticked off 0 to 249 miles an hour and back to 0 in 33.29 seconds. It managed a quarter-mile run in 9.96 seconds and for a time held the official fastest top speed for a road-going vehicle, hitting 285 miles an hour in one direction on a closed road in Nevada. Except, it's not actually an Agera RS. Yes, it looks like one from the outside, but actually this is a gloriously mad one-off called the Chimera, spelt slightly differently to the TVR. And have you spotted what's different yet? It's down here. Instead of the single clutch 7-speed auto you got with the Agera, you've got a 6-speed manual. And that's not all. In fact, the powertrain is a combination of the trick simulated manual gearbox from the CC850, that's Koenigsegg's retro tribute to its first ever production car, the CC8S, and the engine from a Jesko, a twin-turbo 5-litre V8 with no flywheel for whip-crack revs and lots of power. 1280 brake horsepower on regular 95-octane pump fuel or 1600 horsepower on E85. The gearbox is actually the 9-speed automatic from the Jesko underneath, but uses sensors and actuators to simulate the exact force feedback you get from a real manual. So, you can stall it, you can slip the clutch, you can do perfectly timed heel and toe downshifts, all that good stuff, or you can stick it in a full auto mode if you're feeling incredibly lazy, or hit this button on the dash and take control via the paddles behind the wheel. And that is a unique feature to this car, the Chimera. The CC850 only gets the 6-speed manual gear lever and the full auto mode, but this, you get the choice of all three. And because it only weighs 1400 kilograms, which is 100 kilograms less than the Jesko, this thing really rips. 4th gear, 5th gear, 250, 60, 70. Oh, I'm gonna go on the brakes now. That was somewhere fast approaching 300 kilometers an hour. It's insane! Now, if you recall, the Agera RS was more of a track-focused Koenigsegg, unlike more road-biased stuff like the Agera or the Jesko Absolute, and that totally plays out here with the experience of driving this thing. So we're on Koenigsegg's test track. It's actually a runway, so it's not the full track experience, but I'm still getting the chance to wang it around when I turn around at either end. And honestly, the way this car reacts, it feels so instant, so flat, so fizzy. That engine, the way it revs up is absolutely insane. But here, we'll go around this bend here, down into 3rd gear, down into 2nd gear, on the brakes. Yep, it's flat. The responses are electric. It's a proper event to drive this car. And then when you consider that I'm bringing together this whole mechanical ballet with my left foot on the clutch pedal and my right hand on this gear lever, it just makes the whole thing, yeah, more of an event. Not that Koenigsegg hypercars were ever dull to drive, you understand. It's just that this thing, this little stick, makes the whole thing more memorable. You've probably noticed there's a bit of a manual revolution going on at the moment with cars like the GMA T50, Aston Martin Valor, Pagani Utopia and Porsche 911 ST, and now this. And I can see why. When you combine modern handling polish and power with old-fashioned gear shifts, it's utterly addictive.
More power, especially in one of these psycho Swedes, isn't really going to move the enjoyment needle anymore, but a manual shifter most definitely is.
Which is all well and good, but there is a bit of an elephant in the room, because why on earth would you pay what I can only assume is enormous amounts of money to transplant a CC850 and Jesko powertrain into an Agera RS when you could just buy a CC850 or a Jesko? To answer that question and all the other unique challenges that this project brought, we spoke to the man himself, Christian von Koenigsegg. Okay, so Christian, the Chimera. Can you explain what are we looking at here? It's a coming together of different parts of different cars. So
yeah,
let's go through which bit comes from where, and then we'll talk about the crazy challenge of making them all fit together and talk to each other.
Yeah, so let's start with the name first, which was interesting. So the owner of the car, who kind of came up with this idea that we started thinking about if we could do or not, and eventually we ended up doing it. He had an idea for a name he came up with during the process, and one of our engineers came up with an idea during the process, and it was the same name. And it was Chimera, and Chimera is some sort of two-headed animal or something like that, or two beasts in one, or something of that nature. And that's truly what this car is. This belongs to, I would say, a friend and a long-term client of ours, Mohammed Ben Sulayem in Dubai, who has a few Koenigseggs and a few more coming. And he said, can we do a special project to one of my cars? And then we presented the CC850 at the Monterey Car Week in 2022, and he saw kind of the technology behind this one, and he said, maybe it would be interesting to take my early Agera RS and do kind of fuse it with this idea. And I've kind of felt, well, you know, that's that, and this is this. But it kind of also made sense from a perspective of development, because we were allowed to use it as an input and test car for the development program as well. I started thinking about it and how it could be helpful, how it could be interesting. But in the end, it was a much bigger work than we had anticipated, because one thing leads to another, and it's about 10 years between these models, and there's several models in between. So you have older electronics on board, newer,
different screens,
and they have. I mean, we have information here now that relates to this engine and transmission, and even here, and it's just so many things coming together. This transmission and engine is intended for mount. I mean, let's say not solid mounts. The Agera RS has a structural engine and transmission, while our more modern cars have active mounts.
Yeah.
So you don't have the same mechanical clatter, you can say, which I always felt was like, oh, it's pretty extreme. And I was so happy when we got them more quiet. And now I have many customers. I miss the old, like the old
rough guttural.
So whatever you do, it's kind of.
Because the Agera RS had a really distinctive sound, didn't it?
Oh,
like this really
inside
rough
and out.
idle. So to break it down, it looks like an Agera RS from the outside. So
pretty
it's
much
not Agera RS body. It's the body of the donor car. Can we call it a donor car?
We can say that, yes.
Then you have the Jesko engine, but it's slightly detuned in the CC850.
Correct.
So here it has the full
Here it has
capability.
let's say, the big turbos.
Yeah.
Which makes it, well, when you're on the boil and shift, you can sense a little bit of spool up after a shift, while in this one you don't, which was the idea. So that's a bit different.
Yeah.
And as the interior had paddles in it, we had a discussion with the owner and said, could you try to fuse the software so I can have all three systems? And I said, isn't it enough with two? No, I would like to try to have three. And said, okay, let's try. In city driving and if you're lazy highway driving and so on, auto is great. Track, both hands on the steering wheel, paddle, boom, 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 aggressive.
Yep.
Mountain and country roads, I prefer manual, because it's the most exoskeleton way of driving the car. It becomes an extension of your skills and your eyes. I mean, the paddle shifts, it only has eyes for choosing to shift, but it doesn't have eyes to choose how to use the clutch. So when you're manual on country roads or mountain roads, you can become more fluid. You can use the kiss point and engine brake and flow better than paddles. So you can drive more with a better flow and a different dynamics with the manual. So it actually improves the performance in a way. Maybe not in seconds up a mountain pass, but how smooth the car operates can be higher and more intuitive. So it's interesting. So that's me blipping.
That's you blipping?
Yeah.
That's all Christian.
It's more fun to blip. It's so
Especially
responsive.
with an engine that's this responsive. It would be rude not to.
So given everything I just said, we have decided for the CC850 program to have one option only because it had no options. But now we've added one option. You can choose to have paddles as well together with the manual and automatic.
What's the uptake?
We don't know yet because we haven't introduced it. You're the first one to hear it.
We're the first ones to hear about it. Oh, well, that's
we will see. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I feel it's like a two-edged sword because it's kind of pure, just manual and automatic. But this is a really fast car, and it has quite a lot of downforce with the pop-up wing and so on. It's a really good track car. So it just gives that little extra edge there. Is it too elaborate and does it become complex and clumsy and so on? Actually, it is lighter than our 6-speed CIMA transmission system we had with manual, and you get the automatic and paddle.
You get to keep the no flywheel on the 5-litre twin-turbo V8.
Correct. So that's actually a huge advantage because if you have a normal manual, you usually have a flywheel and a clutch on the crank, and that slows it down. Here you have this motorcycle-like response. Yeah. It revs. It's like a motorcycle. You can blip so easily and just rev match like never ever experienced in another car before.
When you came up with this idea for this, we've been calling it a simulated manual. Are you comfortable with that phrase?
You know, you can call it whatever you want. Actually, you can call it. There is no mechanical connection from the shifter to the transmission.
Shift by wire.
It's a shift by wire. You're allowed to call it whatever you want. But,
Thank you.
But it gives the manual experience. It's easy. If you want, you can stall the car, you can slip the clutch, you can burn the clutch even if you want. I will be a bit too clumsy. There we go.
Oh, Christian, you've done it again. Talk about just the challenges, because it sounds relatively simple, you know. Oh, you take this chassis, you put the engine in, you put the subframe here, bolt it back together.
So we had to move battery positions, we had to rip out all the cable harnesses, wiring harnesses, put half new controllers in, write new software for instrumentation, for infotainment system. It has actually active aerodynamics. You can see the active shock absorbers here. And this is an interesting point. This subframe here is from the Jesko. And these shock absorbers kind of ended up in a different position compared to on the normal Agera RS. But we were very lucky. They kind of just fitted perfectly there in this open
viewing
void.
window.
It's like we almost planned it, but that's kind of just mix of the two ending up like that.
It's nice that you got one piece of luck, because it sounded like lots of other pieces had to be modified.
That's
and
it.
Cut and
And
shifted.
there is the opportunity if we open up in the rear here. Yeah, there we go. So the wheels are smaller, so it makes the gear ratio slightly shorter. So it's even kind of faster through the gears. On an Agera, the exhaust system goes up here and down here because the transmission goes down there back to here. So that's the difference in length of a transmission on a Jesko or a CC850.
And this is the benefits of this light speed.
Exactly, it's just this
that's
compact little lump. It's smaller, and of course the CIMA 7-speed is an evolution of the CIMA 6-speed manual, which is equally long almost. It's just this difference. So it just shows how compact and lightweight this thing is.
There's going to be people watching there with deep pockets who are thinking, oh great, Christian is open for business for crazy one-offs. Right, I'll have a CCX with a Jesko engine with a blah, blah, blah.
I would say it's partially true, but we would not do exactly this again. It's just too much work. It's better and for sure more financially viable for the owners to buy a new car or create a project from scratch even.
Yeah.
This kind of reverse fusing is just like, and of course we learned something along the way on this, but it's still it's still one-off, and we would have to one-off it again, and we would not recommend doing it to this level.
It's the difference between renovating a house or just leveling it and building a new one.
In a way, yes. But the end result is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Incredible project. Well done for seeing it through, because it sounds like you probably got halfway through and thought, enough already. But you've seen it through. And thanks for having us along to have a go in it.
Yeah.
It's a special,
Let's see what you think.
Special thing.
Okay, so with a little more context to chew on and some Christian von Koenigsegg sized science to digest, we decided to take the Chimera for a slightly gentler road drive.
Okay, so let's talk about this engage shift system manual gearbox down here. The big question is, would I notice, would I know that it was a simulated manual if I wasn't already told? And it's a tricky one to answer because development is still ongoing. Koenigsegg is still improving it and the feel of it all the time. And some things are absolutely brilliant, but there are a couple of pointers. So I love the feel of this exposed mechanism down here, and this open gate manual is fantastic. It's quite heavily spring loaded, so if I go from fourth to third here, it just slots right in. It feels really natural. No complaints here on the way that this stick moves around the gear lever. Potentially it could be a little firmer, there could be a little bit more mechanical grit to the way it moves, but I'm told that's exactly what they're working on. My biggest gripe is probably with the clutch pedal. So it's spring loaded, the spring loading feels about right, it's quite a natural amount of force to put through your left leg. But it's when you're moving off in first, the biting point, there's normally a little moment, a little bit of vibration, a physical sensation when you hit that kissing point or that biting point that I don't seem to get here, which makes moving off slightly more difficult and slightly more fraught with danger that you're going to stall in front of all your other hypercar mates. But as I said, they're still working on this system and that'll be ironed out. And once you're up and running, well, it's just a fabulous manual gearbox to operate. It's a really special piece of technology. Why not just bolt a manual gearbox to a Jesko engine and be done with it, I hear you cry? Well, it's a very good question, because there are a load of benefits to this new system. Firstly, you wouldn't have the full auto mode, you wouldn't have the paddle shift mode in this Chimera. Also, you'd have to re-homologate the whole powertrain, it would be heavier. You'd have to have a flywheel, which would erode some of this engine's crazy free revving nature. And that's what makes this so clever, because it's not just a gimmick that you can overlay on top of this 9-speed, light-speed automatic transmission. There's actual tangible benefits beyond the fact that you get a gear lever to waggle about. And there are other benefits too, because the auto gearbox underneath it has 9 speeds. You can actually play around with the ratios that correspond to the numbers 1 to 6 in the manual gearbox. Now, for this car, the Chimera, they're fixed for the time being, but in the CC850, when you change around with your driving modes, the ratios within your manual gearbox are jumping about, which is just brilliant. And if all that is making your brain hurt a little bit, allow me to simplify it. All you really need to know is that this mad invention, this simulated manual gearbox, it just works brilliantly, and it makes this Frankenstein of a hypercar even more of an event to drive. And let me tell you, it even rides pretty well on these public roads around Anglehome. The engine, it's tractable even at low revs, it feels smooth, but it's always primed for a little poke of pure violence. Mohammed Ben Sulayem, thank you for letting us pile a few miles onto your car. You're a lucky boy.
Okay, so this Chimera doesn't do much that the CC850 or the Jesko doesn't already do, but it's got that secret ingredient that billionaires so covet: exclusivity. It's one of one and a cracking story to tell when you're showing it off to your mates. It was, however, our first opportunity to try the new simulated manual gearbox, which confirmed what we already knew. A, that Christian von Koenigsegg is a mad professor with a knack for making wildly complicated and ambitious engineering solutions stick, and B, that the manual gearbox is still the boss.
What a rush! What a rush this car is! What a gloriously bonkers company Koenigsegg is. Not only to knock out cars that are as consistently unhinged as this, but to take on a project of this complexity. It just shows Christian von Koenigsegg. He's a glutton for engineering punishment, but he's made it stick. It looks entirely natural. Everything is perfectly put together, from the leather on the dashboard to the finish of the carbon fibre. You'd never know that they had to cut and shut and bang and wiggle to make all these components that were never meant to live together come together and create this glorious, glorious machine.